Okay, calling the Committee on Ways and Means to order for an informational briefing. So we'll hear from BNF, DOE, UH, and DLNR about the proposed lapses and timeline, criteria, and status of different projects. So why don't we begin with BNF? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chair, Senators. Louis Oliveira from the Department of Budget and Finance. Appreciate the opportunity to talk about what's happening with the upcoming capital improvement project budget. We did answer the questions that you did provide to us. We hope that it was sufficient to kind of give a degree of context about what happens. But if I can just briefly kind of summarize the issues, in between each biennium, the supplemental year, is essentially the statutory lapse provision of CIP projects that were appropriated in the previous biennium. This is something that occurs naturally due to statute. And so as projects get, released, there's a three-step process. A project gets released, and then a project either gets encumbered, and then a project gets expended. So the process of which a project can remain on the list is getting to a point where a project can be encumbered and actually incur expenses before the statutory lapse date, which is usually the biennium +1. So what we have right now in this particular situation is coming into this supplemental year is that we are looking at projects as they kind of go over. Departments are telling us which projects are looking like they're going to lapse. And what we do is we prepare a supplemental budget based upon projects that are essentially going to come off the list and provide for additional authorization that could be included in the supplemental budget. So I think in terms of like individual projects.
Well, why don't you explain the why though, right? Because you guys were looking for additional bonding capacity as you move projects out of the operating.
Correct.
Then you needed capacity so that you could move those projects in. So you tried to make room by identifying lapsing projects so that you could move those projects in from the operating.
So there were two things, right? There were the projects that were cash funded in this current fiscal year, which we are converting over into GO.
Yeah.
Right. And
so you had to make room for those.
Yeah, we had to make room for those projects. Yeah. Authorization essentially.
In addition to admin projects.
In addition to admin projects.
Yeah.
And then we also had projects that were essentially coming off the list because they're reaching that statutory lapse deadline. And so two things can happen. We can either identify these projects and just go ahead and put them into the supplemental budget, or they can just go through the process and then just statutorily lapse at the end of FY24.
Yeah, but if you did that, then you wouldn't have enough room.
Then you would have to wait an entire year, essentially, in order to use that additional authorization in order to, again, move the cash CIP projects over, or to just look at putting together a capital plan going forward for the state.
Yeah.
So that whole process in terms of how it is, I mean, I know there's a lot of discussion with regards to what happened, for example, with the Department of Education, but that conversation actually happened well before Lahaina started. So, I don't want there to be a misconception that somehow that particular process happened because of Lahaina.
Yeah.
There's no question that it does help Lahaina because it does.
Now that we have the bigger picture of the why, right?
Yeah.
Moving projects from cash over, the admin's projects in there.
Correct.
And then you have to make room.
Then you have to make room.
In order to meet. That's kind of why we're here.
Yes.
But now going to the technical timeline, when did BNF start to ask the agencies for their lapse, the possible projects that could be lapsed? So
for the people that are part of this particular briefing, the DOE, that conversation happened a little bit earlier. There was conversation going on between BNF and the DOE with regards to how to get these projects to get executed and what's going to execute given the timeline that existed. The other projects within the Department of Land and Natural Resources, as well as the University of Hawaii, happened during the budget development process. They would identify projects that either need to get readjusted.
So what does that mean? BNF sent them a memo?
It's part of the budget prep process when we're putting together the supplemental budget. And that is included in some of the information.
So what was the timing of that?
That would have happened starting in October, actually. And so I think for the other two departments that were there, the reasons for early lapsing, they have their particular reasons, and they would probably be the best people to have the discussion. Like one of the projects, even within the Department of Land and Natural Resources, we have one project for Kawai'i Harbor, which we're essentially lapsing, but we're reappropriating again because we need to put it into a different cost element, actually. So there's a forced lapse, but then there's also a reappropriation into the right cost element.
Yeah, I think most people are concerned about some of the projects that they felt were already moving along.
Mhm.
And
Yeah. So from the Department of Budget and Finance perspective, when we do a release, our process for capital projects is we'll get a request from the department asking for release of a CIP project. Once we do the release and the A15 has been allotted for the particular project, or A21. A15, once the A15 has been allotted, it's essentially out of our hands. It's within the department now at that point in time to execute it. So a couple of things can happen. During that time, right, they'll go ahead, they'll contract, they'll do things, and there's a process of which they can, essentially encumber money. So there are two types of encumbrances. There are claims encumbrances and there are contract encumbrances. And these are things that would happen that would essentially prevent something from statutorily lapsing, because you encumber it.
so none of the projects on the list are encumbered.
I would have to defer to the departments individually, but there were some that had release, but no encumbrances, for example. And it all depends on, at that point in time, any department, for example, even beyond just the departments that are here today, in terms of where they are in the project development process. So.
So I'm confused, because you're saying that once the money is released, or you appropriation is released, then it moves to the departments and they would encumber. And once they encumber, you can't claw back once it's been encumbered.
Once it's encumbered
do that.
at that point in time. But again, there are two types of encumbrances, Senator. There is a claims encumbrance, or otherwise known as a blanket encumbrance. And that is essentially an encumbrance that's like you have a pending contract that's going to happen after the end of the fiscal year. And the process is usually you have 6 months after the end of the fiscal year. So December 31st of that calendar year to have a contract in place. If you do not have a contract in place, technically that encumbrance goes away, unless you go in and you ask for an extension from the comptroller for an extension of that blanket encumbrance. But if you have a contract encumbrance, you actually have a physical contract with a vendor, with a contractor, that encumbrance stays for as long as until you finally close that contract.
But you're unaware, because
that happens outside of.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So DOE or UH and DLNR may have some of those instances, but that's not really.
That's not part of our process. Yeah. Once we do the release, we're out of that project process. The only time that it comes back to us is that when we finally come to where we are right now, when we get to the statutorily lapsed deadline, which is the beginning, the supplemental.
So as far as you know, then if you've released it, the money is sort of on their way, or is being encumbered. So that's POW from you folks.
Well, he's saying he doesn't know.
No, yeah, that's not.
But
part of
but you've already said this amount is no longer, it's being expended until it's not.
We don't know.
No.
We can add, a department can ask for release.
He's saying it could be released.
Yeah.
And if the department does nothing, it could still get lapsed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you just explain one more thing? What is early lapse?
An early lapse is what's happening right now.
Before the deadline.
It's before the deadline. So the deadline happens on June 30, 2024. That's the statutorily lapse date.
So why don't we begin with projects in the first year of the biennium have a 3-year lifespan.
Correct.
Right. The projects in the second year have a 2-year lifespan, plus the extra 6 months, give or take, because what he's saying on the
claims encumbrance.
Right. And then very few instances where the comptroller can extend.
Yeah. But then that process is outside of BNF either. That's a DAG.
But let's say it's in the first year, and we know maybe there's agreement not to do the project, then the legislature, they're going to recommend it, but the legislature could force lapse the project, clearing up room in the bonding capacity to add another project.
Yes.
So the criteria is that it can't be completed in that 3-year cycle.
It could be a number of
No,
things.
he's saying,
Yeah.
he's saying lots of those decisions are delegated to the specific department.
They're the expending
The
agency.
department would be the one.
Yeah,
to-
correct.
That's where at some point we have to get to UH, DOE, and DLNR.
Yeah.
But he's just going as to how we got in this situation
Yeah.
to begin with.
In this situation, there is a cycle. I think there was a significant amount of money that was appropriated in the previous biennium. I think there was almost $1 billion that was appropriated in a previous biennium just for the Department of Education. So I think we are kind of in a state right now where there are a lot of appropriated funds within the DOE that could be difficult to execute or challenging to execute, just given the capacity.
Yeah.
I think we understand that there are constraints, manpower, permitting, all of these different processes that take a long time in order for a project. So the time frame actually to execute on these projects gets very narrow, right? Especially if you're on the second half of the biennium, where you literally only have 2 years to try and get from concept to actually contracting.
So the reason for the not releasing was because of, so was there a memo or something that went out that
No,
wasn't?
the release of projects happens when a department sends us a request to release a project. And then we go through our process and then we make sure that it's included, and then it goes through BNF to the governor, and the governor releases a project. So the release of project is essentially again, as the legislature appropriates, the executive releases, and that process is just to make sure that we're keeping track of everything that is getting released. But once a release happens, the release is just an authorization to expend, Senator. After that, it's the process of actually getting the project done.
Senator Inoue.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it's kind of confusing. I had a $7.5 million Hilo High School gym. And I was confused because the money was already appropriated, released, the entire amount. Normally, the projects, like we would allocate a plan and design separate before construction. But this particular one was the entire project. So with the 7.5 would include plan and designs immediately going to construction, because it's been a long delayed project. And so we expanded that, and the architecture already was working on it. And then I found out that the monies were lapsed. Found out in
You mean
discussing.
it's on the list to be forced?
Yeah. But I was concerned if the architecture was paid or not, because he already did the work.
Yeah.
But
So
then,
I think those questions we have to ask the department.
yeah.
Yeah.
Found out,
Yeah.
I did find out that he did get paid, but my monies were lapsed, so.
So it's probably not going to be the full
The full
7.5.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if that's in the governor's budget, I think there's going to have conversations between the money committees and
BNF.
the BNF regarding the specific amounts that have to be forced lapsed.
And I think there's a part of that happens too during this process where, there's an early lapse amount that's determined, but then as the year progresses, sometimes projects get accelerated or something happens, and then all of a sudden you get an encumbrance, and then that number has to change by the time that the
The
legislature
concern
finally.
we had is because if it's going to be in the budget of next year, when we get into session, we can't do anything for the rest of the year until the end of the session, right?
No, not necessarily. So
Yeah.
if the House doesn't agree to certain forced lapse and the Senate doesn't agree to certain forced lapse, it's
It's-
pretty eminent that forced lapse is dead.
Yeah.
So the department will have some indication, okay, it's still on the table and they can proceed.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it could be ending on June 30th anyway, so you're not gonna have time to do the project.
No, but they have the 6
Yeah,
months.
that's.
Right.
Yeah, they could do a claims encumbrance,
Yeah.
but then they would have to get to a point
Yeah.
where they actually do encumber.
But it doesn't matter if you have the forced lapse, because if they don't do that, it's gonna lapse anyway.
Right.
Yes.
It's just that we're not gonna be able to put another project in its place.
Yes.
Which is,
You would have to wait an entire year to work on this, on the.
well, maybe not
authorization
us, but the department would.
The
have to.
departments would, yes.
Yeah. Senator Kim.
Okay, so I want to ask you a more global question. So you said earlier, once the release is done, then BNF is out of it. So is BNF stay somehow oversight? Because in the sense of ZOE, they had $1 billion worth of projects, which we raised during the session, that either needed more money, the price had escalated, wasn't completed. I mean, $1 billion, it was brought up. And at that time, at no time did DOE tell us that what are some of these projects, okay? So then they have another $1 billion that was going to lapse this 2024. And then we gave them, I don't know, 350 million more during this last session. So at some point, does BNF look at it and say, you know, what is your capacity? Are you going to be able to do these projects? Because we're just piling projects on top of projects on top of projects. So instead of finishing the $1 billion and putting the extra money, like in Farrington needed 14 million more, which nobody told me about, we just added more and more. So at what point do we have this kind of report? And so somebody's got to be overseeing this.
And so I think, you know, this is my first year coming into this whole process for this round in terms of where we are in the lapsing, the statutorily lapsing year. I think that is something that we normally, our process is once it's released, it's the departments, Kuleana, to basically move it through, do what they need to do.
Yeah, but if
Senator.
they have, as budget and finance, you know that they have $1 billion of money encumbered and tied up, $1 billion,
Yeah.
right? And then there's another $1 billion that is going to lapse. So I don't know if the monies that folks are lapsing, which year it came out of, but why would we then keep appropriating more money when we haven't even dealt with the billions that is encumbered and sitting there and getting more and more to the point where you can't fund them because the cost continually escalates?
It's kind of what's happening right now, Senator. I mean, this conversation.
This is old, this $1 billion. Have been I don't know how many years.
I don't disagree with the comment. I think for us, this conversation started back in March, actually, of this year in terms of capacity and how much projects can move through the system, given the capacity within the departments to execute on projects. So I think we're in that process right now where BNF is kind of looking at these things and basically saying, what kind of capacity do we have to actually execute on these projects?
Well, you know, I'm sorry to keep beating this, but when we had budget briefings early in the year and we talked about DHHL and what the capacity they had to spend the $650 million that we gave them for projects, that whole capacity came up. So that whole thing isn't new. So only till March, then you guys started talking about this?
Well, March was 3 years after I came into this particular role when it came to my attention that there was a possibility that there was going to be a significant amount of lapsed projects that could happen. Again, and this is primarily just within the DOE's.
But before it lapsed, shouldn't somebody be managing it? Is what I'm trying to say. Who's responsible for managing it, overseeing DOE to make sure that this $1 billion don't keep getting more and more to the point where we can't fund it because they don't want enough funding?
I think the Department of Budget and Finance can take a look at again, the capacity and the amount of appropriation that's happening within CIP. And that's essentially what we're doing now, Senator.
So you're going to now do this on a regular basis that you should have been doing from before?
I think the intention really is for us to take a look at what capacity does the departments have to execute on projects. Yes.
So Chair, if I might, as a non-member, I didn't come here to do this, but now that I'm here. So I get Donna's point, Senator Kim's point that we are, we should have been doing it, but I guess in listening to the exchange, I'm a little troubled that if this conversation had been going on since March, but Ways and Means, Finance, the former CIP chair, nobody was involved in these conversations so that we were prepared. And when we had our, priorities meeting in November, we had specifically asked you in the lapses, was it just about some of the general fund CIP to help make some of the money Maui needs, and would that potentially be replaced with geo bonds? And the answer back in early November was yes.
Yes.
And then we read the press release that this has gone to 400 million and we're lapsing geo bond projects that force lapsing, and so I mean when you see the remarks from the legislators, I mean, we were not aware of any of this until it came out in the paper, and would have been helpful to have been part of the conversation. I think is what everybody around this table is really saying, that if we're going in this direction, you know, what is it? How can we work together to get it done? But there are commitments that were made to our communities, and people were expecting these projects that were going to be happening. And apparently there were all these other conversations, and that wasn't going to be the end result, right? With over 400 million of 4 slabs.
Yes, when we had the conversation earlier about talking about the priorities, that conversation on what was happening with the DOE, Mr. President, was something that was happening already long before. But when we talked about the needing to take existing cash CIP projects and then move them over into bonding capacity, those projects and making liquidity available in the treasury and moving those into bond financing was something that was predicated as part of the plan. The DOE, the happenings or the early lapses that were happening from the DOE were just part of the normal process. So I apologize if there was some confusion around,
There was no
different
confusion.
things.
There was just a lack of any information, heads up, or awareness of what was happening. So you answered a specific question very specifically, but it might have been helpful if you had said specifically to your question, this is the answer, but there is a bigger picture that we're looking at on the capital side, and you should be aware of this and everything else. But there are a lot of excellent, sharp questioners on the Ways and Means Committee. I actually came down to say to the women of WAM, and Miley, I'm giving you credit for wearing green, because I cannot see that far already at my age. They are dressed in the Christmas spirit, and I simply wanted to say, season's greetings. The men are dressed like men. We never. Season's greetings to the men, to all of our staff here. I give best wishes, and then to the executive branch members. Since you are all present, I'll say season's greeting, and I'm going back up and watch this. Thank you.
Thank you.
So Director, if you look at page 7, attachment 2. So what you're talking about is on March 14, DOE brings to BNF's attention the large backlog.
Correct.
But then you have on April 21st, so going back to Senator Kim's point, that's 5 months of no response.
Well, staff is working, together during that period of time, but what this just represents is the timeline that we have, again, in terms of like actual events that are happening during that process. But staff was in communication with each other during that time.
But those extra 5 months, if there was a different process, wouldn't have compressed the November rush, which seems to have impacted DOE.
Yes. So when we originally were putting together the budget, Senator, and again, this is the budget and finance working in conjunction with the departments. Our initial estimate of the lapse amount that was going to happen from the DOE was a little over 600 million, actually. But we prepared a budget based upon that projected early lapse amount. But then there was after the budget was prepared, after we had gone through every department and put together a capital plan, we had learned that number had changed. And we were essentially about to provide the final decision.
Meaning less.
Yes,
So
it went down.
DOE tells you, oh, you can force lab 600 million worth of projects. So then you guys add 600 million worth of projects.
We prepared a budget based upon that.
And then when they say, oh, sorry, it's actually less, now you're like, shit, now we can't afford all of this.
Then we would have to go back in and basically unapprove projects that were already approved. Yes. And then that's where we got into a conversation. It was like, well, how much of these projects can actually execute? How much of these projects are going to naturally statutorily lapse anyway?
Try to bring down their, bring back up their numbers so that you can accommodate all the projects or most of it. Senator Kim.
What about those projects that and I think Senator, I alluded to this, projects that have already gone through, the planning, the design, the permitting, all of this cost. And then now to force lapse it and then start all over again, whether or not we can even reappropriate the monies again, it all goes down the drain, right?
The process of reappropriation would have to start over again.
Right,
yes.
and so whatever projects or plans that was done, maybe some of the planning and design would last, but some of the other stuff, you have to start all over again, right?
Yes, I mean, again, if the project was going to lapse,
So do you folks do an analysis of what is actually gonna cost us to do that?
we have not gone to that level of
But
detail.
shouldn't that be before you decide to lapse something that, we've already expended, 10 million on this project. And now if we lapse the rest of the money and the project and delay it and go back, it's gonna cost us not only that money that we spent, but the escalation cost to do it 2 years from now.
Yeah, I understand the situation, but we cannot stop the statutory lapse. The statutory lapse is going to happen.
I understand the statutory lapse. I'm talking about some of these forced lapse that you folks are just doing without any kind of analysis, right? I've not seen any analysis. It's like, if your car breaks down in your family, you look at your budget and say, you know what, we might have to buy another car next year. But what does that mean? What does that mean to our budget? What does it mean? Can we afford it? Should we fix it? Or should we do it now and delay something else? I mean, those are the kind of analysis that should be done by government
Yes.
to save the taxpayers' dollars, because we're gonna then end up paying more.
Well,
Yeah,
if
yeah.
you especially if you have the permitting already. So if you have the
Yeah.
permitting,
Mhm.
now you're gonna have to start all over with that too.
Yeah, but and again, we're not working off of lists. We're working off of lists that have been provided to
Okay.
us.
So there's no criteria that you gave the department saying what Senator Kim,
As-
Senator
yeah.
Noy is talking about.
As the people that are on the project,
Yeah.
doing it, executing it, that's where the knowledge.
You basically assume that they already did that analysis and
Yeah,
that they gave you a
I-
clean list.
I would have to, I guess, from the process of putting everything together, assume that there's a certain level of analysis that's done at the expending agency
So
level.
that's the questions we're gonna ask the departments, whether or not they did this analysis before giving you a number. Because you're saying it's their responsibility.
Yeah, at the end of the day, we're working off of information that's provided to us, Senator.
Let's hear it.
Okay, so maybe,
Just one question. So BNF has no guidance to the departments because what do they know in terms of what's really important? As Senator Kim says, this is permitting is already done. How do you look at that, or can you give guidance?
they just asked for a number.
You're supposed to know
Just a
that.
number,
Yeah.
you don't.
Well, I mean, for us, right, I mean, I think we're not in the permitting process, we're not in the
But
engineering
in
process.
terms of the
so-
process and where they are in that whole timeline from,
No, and he's saying in some of these cases,
They
the
gotta get
agency
the-
staff makes more than him.
I wouldn't know unless I would have to go back in and
But they
reevaluate an
have
individual
guidance.
project myself.
BNF doesn't have guidance to the departments of some standardized assessment by the
Our,
departments.
our guidance from the standpoint is projects will statutorily lapse at the supplemental year. If you are encumbered in a claims encumbrance, you got to get to contract encumbrance at some point in time. If you're in contract encumbrance, the money will not lapse. But if you are, unless you decide to close that encumbrance.
But I still don't
do that.
understand the 5 months, because if that's the case, then you could have, if we were alerted, some of us could have said, okay, we got to get on it.
Yes.
I,
I mean, the 5 month window is what sticks out to me. Is that
I,
it would have gave us more
Yeah.
time to go and figure things out.
I think, yeah, during that process there, we can definitely take a look at what happened during that thing. But that conversation, even, I think it's actually the fact that it started back in March was something of an anomaly, because there was this big number that was kind of moving through the system, because that March number could have very well been June or July under any other normal circumstance. But because the number was so large back in March, I think the conversation popped up already.
Yeah, but if it did happen in June or July, I think BNF would have acted differently, because knowing that to craft your budget, you would have had less time.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, why don't we just start with UH then, because you have the shortest list, yeah? What's that attachment?
You want me to stay?
Yeah, you can, it's so close. I mean, no, you can sit back there.
What number? You're going to give us direction on the agenda, which portion we are.
No, so well, yeah,
Tell me what attachment number?
okay. So page 21 is UH. Oh, so 29 is UH.
29 on our list or 29 written on the report?
29 of 197.
Last page.
29, what?
Yeah. Okay, you guys want to just give an overview of how, what impacts?
Thank you, Chair, Senators. Nice to be here this week. We have two projects on the list. One is 8.7 million that was in repair, improvement, modernization for UH Hilo. Unfortunately, it was appropriated as V funds, which are ARPA funds, which cannot be used for general repairs and maintenance. So BNF advised us quite early that the funds could not be released for the purposes for which they were appropriated. The second one is 500,000.
So we're talking about 9.2?
8.7. Oh, I'm not looking at the same thing you are. It's 8.7 million.
And then there's a
There's a five, okay, the second one is
8.7, you're talking about UH Hilo, yeah?
correct.
So is that in the new budget? Is that gonna,
We have requested,
There is RIM requested
Yeah, I have-
again for UH Hilo.
in the amount of 7. $7.3 million, yes. And we also have about 4.5, I think, for next year that was appropriated last year. So we have a total of more than 8.7 between what was appropriated last session for FY25 and what we have requested and the governor supported for FY25. This is, Chair Kim, this is actually, some of this was for air conditioning, which is an area of concern you've noted to me previously at
It was
UH.
raised by students.
Yeah, exactly.
and what was the second?
The second item is 500,000 for something called proof of concept for Maui Health System. This was appropriated to the UH community colleges. It was not anything UH had requested. No legislator nor agency reached out to us for help with the project. So we don't actually know what it was. So we never requested release. It probably should be appropriated to an agency that whose project it actually is.
Any questions for UH? Thank you. Okay, DLNR. DLNR. I'm like only looking at you.
This.
What attachment?
Oh, page. Oh, 21. 21 of 197.
All right. Good afternoon, Senators.
Good afternoon.
Don Chang, Chair of Board of Land and Natural Resources. I also have Cardi Chang and Dina Valley. So I think sitting there, I've heard some of the comments that clearly there are some people that we should have spoken to, like Senator Moriwaki about the Waikiki project and Senator Kim about the Moana Law Gardens. So we did have several LAPS projects. So this, the first ones are the Waikiki Master Plan. And these are actually, they were all part of one project. And yes, we did intentionally lapse those projects because upon discussions, and I believe that our OCCO had discussions with the Waikiki Improvement District about they might be redesigning their rescoping. So our intention is after the planning has been more detailed, we will come back. But we think that right now we're not ready to do any construction. So that's why we have decided to lapse these funds. But we do plan to come back when we're ready with the plan towards construction.
So I think some of the problems on this was that there's some health and some safety issues in terms of what needed to be done. Was that assessed when you worked with the project?
I think that's a different project. So we do have some funds that were available. I think it was the boardwalk project.
There was two projects that the Waikiki was, there was a boardwalk project and also a small
Crumbling, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's a separate
beach
one.
nourishment project.
And we did, I think that there are funds for, this was the larger project, the building of the 3 T groins out in Waikiki Beach. So this was a more master plan for Waikiki. Some of the projects that you may be referring to were more isolated over particular areas of Waikiki that I believe we did seek separate funds for that.
So this isn't the sand replenishment either for,
There is a
Like-
small, I think.
Yeah,
There's a small
Right.
scale beach nourishment which we're gonna implement, which is separate from this larger Waikiki master plan.
So,
I think
yeah.
in particular to a specific area of.
so offline, I'd like to see what the projects were
Okay,
that you're not.
Okay, because I do believe that we actually funded that project, but this was the larger master plan where they're doing the environmental assessment.
So you funded it at a different pot or partly?
Out of
this
a
pot?
different pot, that's Kawehiwehi, the boardwalk, the sand replenishment. So I will follow up with you specifically, Senator, on
Thank
that.
you.
Wait,
The other
Senator, sorry,
I'm
Senator
sorry.
Noy.
Yes, Senator. Noy.
Yes, thank you, for being here as well. Hawaii's, the small boat harbor.
Yes.
The $8 million.
Yes,
There was, are there two projects going on at Hawaii? There was a report last week in the Tribune Herald with regards to safety and because there's construction going on for the Kauai intersection. And I think it also involved with DOT because of the construction. So is that the same construction that's going on now that was,
no,
and this 8
no. This particular project, the reason why we're lapsing it is because we were.
that's the one at the beach, yeah?
It's
It's-
North Hawaii Harbor, a small harbor,
Yeah,
that's, I think they're trying to replace the pier with the
Yeah.
marginal wharf.
okay, so, but that has nothing to do with the major construction that's
No.
going on now.
No, I think
Okay.
that's a DOT project. So this one, we still plan on, so we did seek a
No,
reappropriation.
that's a harbor, you know.
Yeah,
That's a harbor.
a DOT harbor or?
No,
DLNR?
that's our Kauai Harbor is what the release said. That construction going on at the harbor, so we were kind of happy that things are moving.
Okay,
But because of the construction that's going on
yes.
and because of the situation with the road, because it's only one road going up, to North Kohala as well, so. But there's activity going on and then I see the $8 million, so I'm kind of confused.
Yeah, that may be a separate project. Which
Or an
project?
older CIP project that maybe the construction is going on now, maybe.
Maybe we'll find
We'll-
out
we'll
for
find
sure.
Okay.
And we'll
all right.
get back to you, but this was a different project.
Yeah.
And the reason why we had agreed to, why we asked that it be lapsed is because it was only included construction or
No.
it
Yeah.
only included planning and we needed to include construction. So we are seeking and the governor did approve the reappropriation of 8 million for Kauai.
All right, thank you, Chair.
No, you're welcome. And Wanalo Gardens, that was a project that, it was intended to be the 42F, but we didn't have the right language. So, that's why it's being lapsed. So we do intend to go back and work. I know that there's been discussions with the Friends of Wanalo Garden. And I apologize, I probably should have spoken to Senator Kim about this. I know we spoke at the end of session last year, but should have come back and discussed. this
Which
with-
fiscal year was that appropriation?
22,
Oh, okay.
22,
Okay, so,
Yeah.
so we can go back.
yeah.
Yeah, okay,
That's it.
okay. So you're gonna
So,
request for that in fiscal year 25.
No,
GIA would be not, we wouldn't be the expending agency, it would be inserted into our budget through the GIA process.
If we have a GIA
If
process.
there's a GIA, then it has to meet the 42F requirements. But we wouldn't expend it, we'll just pass it to the nonprofit.
and we just didn't have the right language in this particular bill. But I do know the Friends of Wanalo Gardens, our DOFA has been working with them to try to find the right source of appropriation. And that probably was working with Senator Kim's office.
Okay. Any other questions for DLNR?
Yes. Continuing on the second page, on page 2, all of those items are lapsing. Is that continual?
Are we looking?
Okay, I just want to make sure we're looking at
Yeah.
the same page.
Okay, well, you got the lapsing for the 19.7 on page 1. Those sections, I mean, those projects from page 2 and then 3, those are not lapsed funds.
No,
Project.
are we looking at the Form S? Is that what you're looking at?
I don't know.
This is the.
Yeah.
Part-
So
yeah,
the
okay,
Form
got
S,
it.
no, the only lapses are the ones on page 1.
Oh, okay.
The 19%, the rest are inclusions or not inclusion in the governor's budget
Okay,
for this next fiscal year.
okay, so.
Right, this one was
these
because they needed the
sections that we
42F.
heard earlier, and with Maui's issues, now DLNA's now our Juliana is only the state harbor, I mean, the harbor. And
Lahaina
Lahaina.
Harbor, yes.
Okay, so with the lapsing of the $470 million or whatever we were talking about previously, and with the plans for the Lahaina Harbor coming up,
Yes,
how is it impacting where are we,
No, wait.
is that?
But is
gonna be a
that, that's not on the
priority?
list though, right?
Yeah, no.
No. Because we're only focusing on the forced lapses.
Okay,
So when they come in for the regular
Yeah.
budget process, we can ask them
okay,
questions that are gonna be
Yeah.
part of their budget.
okay, because then it seems like some of our monies will fade away if we're gonna take priority, as the governor says, everything that has to do with Lahaina will move. So,
No.
and so do we have an
One-
amount?
No, well, it may not have even been it. It's still, they're still gonna explain during the budget process what's
Yeah.
in it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, okay. So later on, you already
Yes.
have an idea what the cost for the rebuilding of the harbor.
yes.
That's gonna be interesting. It
Yeah.
might be a big
So
amount.
we have
Okay.
a schedule for every other department.
Yes,
Yeah.
and I
Okay.
believe ours is at the beginning of January.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, DOE. I think, yeah, I mean, the other agencies, except for BNF, I think everyone's done.
Christmas present. So we go to the early page then, now.
No, DOE is what page?
I think the part
Oh, 12.
12, no? Okay.
Okay, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Senator, members of the committee, Chief Hayashi, Superintendent, joining me, Kurt Otoguro, Deputy Superintendent for Operations. The DOE has recommended lapsing $465 million in CIP money, or 47% of the total allocation for biennium 21-23, out of an approximately $990 million. When determining what to lapse, we've prioritized projects that involve ADA or Title IX programs, because lapsing those funds would have jeopardized federal funding. We had 130 million in projects that we had not been able to start. Another 270 million came from projects that were making progress and that we were seeking reappropriation. We're asking to have 65 million reclassified as completion money and returned to us for projects that are nearly finished. As we've applied the criteria related to special education, ADA, Title IX, and those projects that were in permitting. So it's very unfortunate that we have impacted majority of our schools, if not all of our schools statewide. We stand ready for any questions.
Members' questions?
No, I do. So, again, what are the criteria for, forced lapsing, not the statutory lapse, but forced lapsing?
That's the one, ADA.
Yes,
So I'm looking at some projects, for example, Washington Middle School, when it says that it's to improve facilities and infrastructure relating to hazardous materials remediation. It goes bingo, that is something that's related to safety and health of the kids. And I'm just wondering why it's on a forced lapse.
Senator, we did, when we looked at the criteria that we applied, we did look at, as I shared, ADA, Title IX, and those projects that were in permitting. And we can get back to you on that particular project related to Washington Middle.
Because I talked with the principal, he said people came in to look at the design, they came in to measure, because this is in the bathrooms and the tiles were breaking apart, and it was, there was need for remediation, especially with the hazardous materials that are underneath, asbestos. So those are the kinds of things, even in terms of your criteria of ADA and so forth, that one should look at safety of our kids. So I'm just wondering what your criteria were in terms of at least looking at the projects and what they entailed.
Yes, safety definitely is a concern for us, for our students. So we can definitely go back in and take a look at that.
And just one more, that if you're talking about projects that have, that are being lapsed because nothing has been done, again, at Washington Middle, the contractor was already selected, so it seems to me it's way past encumbering, that's actually into execution. So I also wonder about their band room that has been in the making for a number of years, and it was close to actually contracting out so that work could be completed, and it's on the lapse list. So again, you can look at what your criteria are and also looking at your projects and see actually, did you go back to all the principles to at least see where in the process it was?
Yeah, thank you for that, Colonel Toguro, Deputy Superintendent. So that specific project, Senator, there has been a lot of work that has been done. Now, when we looked at all these different projects on the books, whether it's in what stage of the construction project or the planning or design, one aspect of it was flood zone and flood zone mitigation. So unfortunately, Washington Middle is in a flood zone. Not to say that we would stop any projects, but that was a risk factor that we wanted to bring forth to the legislature on a go-forward basis to make sure that we're going to expend this kind of funding to make improvements at Washington Middle, that everyone realizes that it's designated as a flood zone.
No, so is that a new criteria where if any legislator wants to add money for a school that's in the flood zone, now that's going to be our criteria? It may not get spent if it's in a flood zone?
That is an opportunity. When we talked to BNF months ago, that fortunately, we have many projects thanks to the generosity of the legislature. But as we look at prioritization of things, I believe it's a fiduciary responsibility for the department to bring it back to you to say that, not to say that anything could happen, but this funding that we're going to be expending, large funding, is in a flood zone, and there's flood mitigation costs that may also be incurred.
Yeah.
And that's all that was.
So why not have that conversation with the legislator before you add that on the list instead of after?
Yes, yes. I've had conversations with some of you, and you're right. Our communication process needs to improve.
So
That's
for
one.
transparency and for accountability, it's really important for you to give notice on the front end rather than after, and then you're lapsing, because I know that this project has been going on for years.
But it was reported that neither of you even reviewed any of these lists, right? It was all staff.
Staff did.
So
produce
staff
it in-
provided all this list. So what's going to be your new process internally so that it goes up the flagpole, so that you can actually have that conversation with the legislator? Because if it's just DOE staff and BNF staff and they're processing without any kind of thought as to some of the questions we're asking, I think that's probably not a good policy, not a good process.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Senator. We are in the process of reevaluating our internal processes. And we need to do a better job of communicating with all of you.
Not just that, your staff has to communicate with you guys so that
Yes.
you know what's on the list.
Yes. And so those are all current issues that we're examining, and we're committed. I'm very, very committed to ensuring that we evaluate our processes. And so moving forward, we have steps in place so that we're able to address and untangle issues that we've encountered.
So describe for us the current process of a project. I mean, how do you get, how do you follow a project? How do you prioritize? How are the two of you specifically involved in prioritizing?
So we have three types of projects, right? In broad sense, we have work orders, and those are just reports when something is not working at a school. And so our facilities maintenance branch on Oahu will fix it. DAGs will be commissioned to fix it on the environment. That's one kind of project. It's fairly simple. When that project cannot be done immediately or easily, it's kicked back and determined it has to be a project. And that's where your deferred maintenance lump sum gets exorbitant. And so we issue.
I guess what we're trying to understand is the flow chart.
Okay, so
So you have what, a project manager that goes to
right. So
a
the
branch?
first thing that
How does that work?
the first thing we'll do is we have over 1,000 projects that are in different classifications. So when it's just a volume thing that we get to, and that's part of our challenge that we need to get better at. But once the project is done, then we will put in a request for a release, allotment request, and that's what Director Salavera said. So coming on the department to put in that request, say that we're ready to start. Once that project starts, we're going into the planning phase of things. So that's where we define scope. And a lot of the appropriations for our projects have limited definition of exactly what that means. And so we'll spend time to do that. Once we do have.
So are you saying that you have to prioritize your projects with Director Salavera's projects?
I believe we need to do a better job communicating that, because sometimes the allotment request will go quickly and sometimes it will delay. And so that's also time that is taken up in the entire appropriation or lapsing of the fund.
What is specifically the process that the chair is asking about for CIP projects? These are big projects, not work orders, but what is that process when
So you got to
need a
define,
big
you have to
project going
define the
forward?
project scope, right?
So what is involved in that?
So that would require our facilities development branch under Eddie Ige. And I would say, unfortunately, we would engage in a consultant, design consultant, engaged in that. So we will we have to engage with that construction.
And how long has Eddie been the branch chief?
I don't know, 5 years. 4 years, 5 years.
So there's no oversight or evaluation saying, hey, you got too many projects that are not moving. What's going on here? Because like Senator Kim had mentioned, there's lots of projects that are not completed. They're in the budget. There's no communication with us saying, hey, we need completion money. It's just piling up on somebody's desk.
Yeah, unfortunately, over the last 3 years, the time frame for legislative funding and lapsing has not aligned with the reality of construction timelines to get it done. There are different components of construction that are taking way too long, whether it's in permitting, whether it's in contracting, whether it's in protest. And so what we're finding is that if we don't encumber the funds in a timely manner, then this is a situation that we're in right now. Not anyone's fault per se, but it is misaligned. And our attempt to work with BNF earlier this year was to try and get that back into alignment.
So in DOE, who's responsible for monitoring these projects to see that they're moving along or not and where they are? Is there anybody? I know you have thousands of projects, but somebody should be on top of that with the millions we spend, right?
So in any public works, you have planning department, you have a project management department, and project manager does all the contracting. And then when you get to actually construction, we have a construction management arm. That is the entity that does the monitoring of the construction.
Sure. So doesn't that one person oversee the project from the beginning to the end?
No.
No,
Why not?
it's a process that is currently in the state's process.
It's us. So we have to go from one desk to another if we're interested in making sure these projects go through.
No, I know. So why, I mean, that's not the problem other departments have had, is that one project manager doesn't stay with the project to know what the complete project is going to be. Right? I mean, it's crazy that you folks are not aware of like the $1 billion worth of projects that's sitting there and you don't have all the funding. Why didn't you guys come in and ask for that? Did you even know that you didn't have the funding, Superintendent?
Senator, as Craig has shared, we do recognize the fact that we do have areas within our facilities branch that although we have individuals who are working tremendously hard, we have processes that need to be reevaluated and reassessed. And we're working together on that now, together with the board. Priority 3 for our Board of Education and the department is that we're looking at optimizing and looking at operational efficiencies within the department. This is definitely an area that is prioritized and that we need to do a better job at, and we definitely will do that. We're in the process of evaluating.
So when you guys took over, did you look and see that you had $1 billion worth of projects that is sitting there? Is that something that came
Yes.
to your attention right away?
Yes,
And then what did you decide to do about it?
we wanted to go into
When
each,
did you know about the $1 billion?
well, the $1 billion has always been there because it's public, right? It's a $2.1 billion CIP in total, right? Of which $1 billion is actually in progress. So there's another billion, just common sense would ask, so where is that in the process? And that's where the complexity of this, where we are at to get to a contract, which Director Salavera said, so that we can actually encumber the funds. To get to that contract, we can do a claims encumbrance. That means and we have some of those, right?
Okay, I understand that part. I'm saying at one point, do you make that decision? Because you're talking about March, I brought it up during a hearing that you had all these projects that's going to take money, but there were nothing responded back from you guys about this. You know, to think that we can reappropriate all this lapsed money next year, that's not going to happen. You know, it's not going to happen. So now what do we do? You know, and I have a question where you lapsing only half of the gym bleachers. I don't understand what that is. Design and construct and replace the gym bleachers. You got to design and construct gym bleachers?
Yes, because you need a permit. So in the department's perspective, we looked at projects that were already in progress, partially in progress. And so our position was always going to be to ask the legislature to lapse and reappropriate, not cancel the project. And that's where we got caught short. We also had the timing issue of not
But if
getting.
we don't reappropriate because there's not enough money, then what?
The department has also been blessed with a project completion fund over the years. The legislature, because of whatever
How much money you have in that fund?
it's down to probably less than 20 million.
Okay, so if we
Right.
don't fund all of this, that 20 million is a drop in the bucket.
Right. It's been used to offset when you go to a contract and
Yes, it
But
was
you don't
used to
have all
put
the-
the lights
yeah.
back in Farrington Field. We know that because we had to do that.
Right.
But well, I'm talking about this huge amount, Kurt. I'm not talking about 20
So
million
what
dollars.
we did was assess every project to determine upfront now, before we start, do we have enough money or not?
We is who?
Our department, this is our project management branch.
Can we see that list of that evaluation of every single project that you?
And that's what we're going through as we speak. It's, what we submitted to BNF was a point in time. And so this is an active lift. The department has not stopped in any construction project. So it will change because if we get a permit, we'll move forward if we have.
You gave a list to BNF.
At a point
Was
in time.
that list at point of time reviewed and analyzed what the impacts were going to be, how much money was going to be lost, and how if it doesn't get reappropriated, what happens? Did you folks make that full analysis on every single project that you submitted to BNF?
Not to the extent that you said,
Well,
which is,
To what
They
extent,
weren't even aware of the list.
to what extent was it done by the staff?
it was produced initially as all projects that were going to have a lapse date of 6/30/24.
No, so when did you guys review the list and review these processes yourself? Maybe you can start with that to get to.
The list, Senator, the list came to my attention in November, late November. Was the first time I saw the list.
And you approved them to send it to BNF in that form?
At that point in time, Senator, we had to make quick decisions because there were deadlines that needed to be made. And at that point, that's when we applied the criteria of ADA Title IX projects that were implemented that could move forward. Everything else fell into the 400, within that $400 million amount that we needed to identify projects in. And the additional 65 million in completion funds that we're asking for. In that timeframe, we need to make very quick decisions to be able to submit on the list in a timely manner. And so at that point, we did the best that we could.
So how long was that list being worked on? Prior to you seeing it?
My understanding is sometime in March was the initial meeting,
Never before November, did you want to see that list and make sure what was going on as a superintendent?
I wanted to see the list, yes.
But what, you're the superintendent, so you never even saw the list prior to November? You didn't ask, you weren't curious?
I wasn't aware, Senator, that there were discussions going on related to the list.
So you didn't know in March this discussions were going on?
No.
How come?
And this is
You're
not,
aware of this. How can discussions take place when you don't even know it's taking place on such an important projects?
the intent, the original intent was a little different, but we did not share it with the superintendent.
Well, what was the
First step.
original intent?
Yeah,
The original intent was to look at the projects that were at risk that we could not do. Simple as that. There are projects that we've already contracted for that we haven't issued a notice to proceed. So the department has had different statuses of projects, and issuing a contract and not issuing a notice to proceed is only asking for disaster because cost escalations. So we're obligated, we're contractually obligated. And so we needed to prioritize what we need to get out of the gate right now. The other projects were in some stage. Most of it is in permitting. I'll be
So
honest.
you were involved since March.
In some kind, not in the level of detail that I should have been, but I'm aware of what we started. But to get down to each project and where we're at and the risk factor of can we get it done and encumber the funds by next June was the assignment. And so that's why we determined,
And that came up with the 600 million.
right, of that. But some of it is in permitting. We could get it tomorrow and we have sufficient funds. We should do it tomorrow.
So why was that on the list?
Because that we have to get to a number that to match the number that we were given to lapse.
No, but I don't think they
That's the
gave
risk.
you a number. It sounds like DOE said this is how much we're gonna lapse. And then they created their budget based on the number you gave them. But you're saying it's the opposite. You're saying BNF gave you a number that you had to work within.
We originally submitted a lesser number and that wasn't sufficient. Now, and that's the disconnect between director and myself or
what
my
was that
staff.
number was given to them? Director the.
Thank you, Senator. I think there were a number of conversations that were going. We had initially started based upon the 600 number. And then we had prepared the budget based upon that number that was going to early lapse. And then after the budget was prepared, we were informed that number would drop down to a much lower number.
So you never gave them a number per se to begin with?
And then so we went from 600, then it went down to 130.
But her question is, who
Oh, I never gave a
directed
number.
the 600?
Oh, we never directed a
So they
600.
volunteered the 600?
It was a number that was prepared and given to us. Yeah,
And then they dropped it to 130?
By your request, or they just offered it to you?
it was just off. That was from the conversation that happened long ago. Again, that number started much higher than 600. I think it started at a much higher number.
What
but then-
number was that?
I think at one point in time, I think it was as high as 8.
So at one point, the department gave up $8 million.
The department gave a list of all the projects with a lapse date of 6/30/24.
800 million.
It was a much larger number.
But
Yeah.
it didn't go into consideration the risk factors or probability of getting it done, right? So
Yeah.
that's the disconnect.
I think that's where I think BNF and the DOE could have worked much closer together. I think we were working off of an understanding that, okay, these things are going to statutorily lapse. But I think in a go forward basis, what we need to know, at least from our end, before we go into a situation where we start to prepare a budget based upon an assumed number, that number is actually going to materialize by the time that we actually.
Right, so that to me, that's not a disconnect. the department should know if they're asking you for lapse, they want to lapse it, they need the money. So it's up to the department to say, you know what? We can't give you these numbers because these are, there's going to be so many risks to it. We can only give you X amount. Instead of giving them 800 million, then bringing it down to 6, then bringing it down to what? 130, you said?
With 130.
And then you went back up to.
And then, we worked together and
Before?
like, we prepared a budget,
If they didn't meet the deadline, what would have happened?
we would have had to just deauthorize or deapprove a significant amount of projects. So we would have had to gone through a major exercise to redo the capital.
Who would have done it? You
But
would have.
BNF would have
So
had to,
BNF would have gone in, no matter what DOE said, and you guys would have just willy-nilly cut.
we would have to go back and deauthorize or basically deapprove projects that were already approved by, and at that point in time, it had already gone through the approval, the BNF approval process as well as the governor's rebuttal process.
So this is way late in the game.
It was, for us, it was, yes, we were kind of at
Yeah.
the fourth quarter already at that point.
So
So,
just-
Senator,
So, my question is, at what point do you decide to spend the money that you have to work on for facility repair and whether or not it has to go on a request for CIP? Is there a dollar number or the severity of the project?
It's the severity of the project, and if it fits within the process that we've established called job order contracting. If it fits in that category, we can move quickly for lump sum deferred maintenance. If it requires a lot larger sum, then yes, we have to go in for a CIP budget request.
Not depending on what it is, if you have a broken water pipe or.
Broken water pipes are generally,
Building caves in, what?
right, it's based on severity. So if a broken water pipe, that's an easy work order. But if that broken water pipe appears to be much larger in scope to repair it, then that would be.
but that's when you're crafting the budget. What we're talking about now is things that are in the budget that you're gonna lapse. Yeah, Senator DeCoy.
So, and I'm going to take Kaya Puni. The funding that we had there basically was an individual that went on vacation. How do you guys justify the person that goes on vacation not following up on the project and it just gets left there without moving on it and then turning around and asking me to just go reappropriate of the next year? I mean, you guys literally lost the entire project off of somebody going on vacation. Who's the person that fills in for the person that goes on vacation to make sure these projects don't continuously lapse? And I mean, we're already dealing with an emergency situation. Who's that person?
Not aware of that specific project. I'm aware of a PIA project that did not make it out of session last year. That was on the list and did not. Is that the one you're referring to?
Kaya Puni, the sixth classroom.
So that project was on DOE's radar, but it never made it out of session from the House. So it never made the list. It was on the list and
It was on the CIP. It got approved in the budget.
okay, so that's a different project then.
Yeah, I'm talking about the Paia school project that was in the budget, that was approved in the budget.
That went out to bid and had the protests, right? That's what
Yeah.
I talked to
Okay,
you
yeah,
about.
that I have to check, but I don't know the specifics.
So if somebody goes out, because you were there, if somebody goes on vacation, who's responsible to follow up on these projects? Because, I mean, it was a phone call that was, I just go back and reappropriate them.
You know what? Can I just interrupt real quick? So what I passed out was the organizational chart, which might help answer some of that for the Office of Facilities and Operations. And the majority of the new projects would come under the Facilities Development Branch, which is page G4. So you can see from G4, the different planning sections, building inspection, planning unit, project management, construction management. And I felt like that's where Senator Moriwaki was trying to ask who approves what. And so I don't understand. And at some point, it would be interesting for you to provide us to go through a project from the beginning to the end so we can actually see how this org chart works. But if you look at the first page again, what's I think stressful for probably the department and for us is the 4 different branches within Office of Facility. So you have student transportation, right, which is the bus and coordinating all the buses. Food services branch, which is all the cafeterias. You have the development branch, and then you have the maintenance branch. So it almost comes across to me like this one superintendent this is overwhelming. And so I think the discussion has to lead to some point is what's the reorganization? And if the department doesn't do that, then we should suggest how we should reorganize. Because we tried once with SFA, right, School Facilities Authority. The legislature was frustrated with the movement of projects. So they did SFA. And now there's quite a bit of frustration with SFA. So now we're frustrated with both. So this session, we have to
We gave it to DOE.
we have to figure out something. And I think we have to pass something this year to help the superintendent achieve his goals of getting this a lot cleaner. And so that's where I wanted to, so I think more importantly is to your question is if you were to ask, if you look at G4, they don't have names.
That's why.
Which person
Yeah,
does,
who's the person? Who's the phone number? Because it seems like we gotta follow the project ourselves every step of the way. Why we need them for then? If we gotta follow the project. I thought we go look for the money and then we give them to them and they go do the thing, but you know, it's frustrating because now I gotta go back tell my constituents why we no want school for per year now that we using closets for classrooms. Like, I mean, that's why we put our trust in you guys and, you know, for wait for a 5-month break. I mean, it's mobility will just tell us, you know what, which the BNF letter says it. It is important to know that the DOECI projects lapse regularly. Oh, thank you for that one. But so if that's the case, like, how much can you guys handle so that I guess we should put money elsewhere in other
Exactly.
projects. I mean, that's my biggest hang up with this is all of this stuff that we fought for.
she could have put up more deer fencing.
Yeah, I could have put fencing or I could have put like, you know, help the ag department or help DLNR with runoff. I mean, we losing all this money now and you guys telling me for go try reappropriate them? Good luck. BNF is right there. We already know what's gonna happen next year. So I really like know for every step of this way, what name goes with what position and their cell phone number. So I guess I gotta babysit my projects all the way.
Yeah, so who is?
Is that what we have to do?
Facility Operations Assistant Superintendent, is that you, Kurt?
No, so this is,
Office of Facilities
no,
Operations.
this is the current org chart, but you're submitting a new one to the governor to approve, right? So we don't have that yet.
Yeah, but
'cause
this
that's
one right here.
Yeah.
the current.
Assistant superintendent,
Yeah.
Well, that's vacant now.
it's currently vacant. It's currently vacant.
Currently vacant. And where are you on this?
I'm
No, he would be between the office of the superintendent and OFO.
yes.
So
we
there's
should
now a
have
new
him
line.
over here then.
Yeah,
If I may comment, I mean, Senator De La Cruz is correct. I mean, just my humble opinion about the facilities organization right now, it is large. Facilities by itself is large with the number of projects that they have. Bus, food, security is a whole different game. So to have one individual overseeing all of it, at the level of detail that we need to communicate is where I believe we can make improvements on.
G3 then. So
The communication to the legislature is something that we're not doing a good enough job at. And that's providing you with status reports of these projects on a periodic
It would
basis.
be-
And when we can't get it done or there's a clog there, whether it's lack of permitting or lack of funding, we need to come to you earlier than what we're doing today.
So Kurt, how do we remediate this? Because communication has been bad all the way around. I mean,
no.
we're gonna have to answer to the constituents that we all serve. Like, how do you guys fix this? I mean, we can like turn this chart upside down every time we make a mistake, but this is like a big freaking mistake.
Yes.
And I cannot keep calling Keith all the time because Keith never know what's going on anyway. sorry, Key, you didn't know,
Well, that's the
but
thing. How
there's no communication. Like,
Senator, so we are, as I shared, we are definitely, this is definitely a priority for us. There's a sense of urgency, definitely. And we are, through our, working together with our board, we are looking at a process, a plan to do better at what we're doing. But definitely this is not where we want to be. You all work very hard together with our schools, so that, we have safe, functional and appealing schools. And we recognize that you all work extremely hard in working together with the schools and school communities. So we need to get a process in place, that can address that addresses not only the process of communication and improving that with all of you. And that I'm very much committed to doing that. We need,
No, so going back to
folks that have
the
a sense of
previous
urgency.
comments, are you going to be providing a restructuring to us? Or do we have to provide one to you that you're going to react to so that we can get something past this session?
We will provide one to you.
When?
yeah.
We have to work through our board. And
Have you
board
even,
chair.
and you have a preliminary one ready?
We have concepts that the board chair is reviewing and he is engaged actively to.
And when did you come up with this?
Where
preliminary?
We just started engaging the process, Senator. So, we are definitely working on that to be sure that we can,
so,
identify currently what our assets are.
so development branch would be its own now?
Currently, the development branch sits there's a director in facilities development, a director in facilities maintenance, and one in auxiliary services within facilities. Those are the three directors in the sections within the facilities branch.
Okay, because we probably have like exactly 1 month before we can finalize all bill introduction. So there may be attempts to just try to make sure we get something in there to reorganize this office.
So maybe we can have some time to be able to progress through the process that we're looking at now to be able to do a better job within the department, within facilities. I would definitely appreciate
Yeah.
that.
Well,
That latitude.
but we should be able to at least throw things on the table, because if not, we're going to have to wait a whole year. So I don't mind working with the department and, our colleagues to make sure we can come up with something. And hopefully we can have some joint agreement by the time session ends, because that's May.
Thank you. We appreciate that flexibility and we look forward to working together with you to continue to working on a process that will help improve what we're doing.
But this has to be looked at. We have to look at both, I think, holistically. Now, SFA and OFO. But the current system for both doesn't seem to be working. So what's our remedy then, going back to the budget director? If we were to say, we're going to go through the list, right? Everyone has projects and we don't agree with the lapse.
We would take a look at where we are in the authorization schedule and make adjustments depending on what comes out through the legislative session. If we need to increase the authorization schedule, we will. I mean, that's something that would get passed through a bill. So as projects get vetted through the legislative process, we'll continue to kind of track what the overall authorization schedule.
So of the total amount that DOE is asking for in this upcoming budget for CIP, how much is that?
Oh gosh, offhand, I think. I'd have to get back to you exactly.
You know that?
How much CIP is in the governor's budget?
Our requests are for a lot of operating budgets. The CIP budgets are more for lump sum.
Yeah.
How much
Right now, we got 45 million. We asked for 71 million. Actually, we used to get 100 million. So that lump sum funding has gone down.
So and what's the total CIP?
The total CIP for the the total CIP for for 2025 is, I'm sorry. Oh, this is just Department of Education. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You're talking about total statewide.
Total and then their amount.
Okay, their
Sorry.
amount is 500. Sorry. Their amount is 400 million
Okay,
that they're authorized for. For the entire state, it is for the entire state for FY 25 for Geo, it's 1.2 billion.
So 400 million just for this upcoming year that you're asking for CIP?
so they have 1/3 of the budget.
But they still gotta go through the projects for see. which
No, I mean, I
one.
think that's
We'll
where,
still have to go through
that's
the
where we're gonna
Yeah,
have to be a lot more
yeah.
deliberate in saying, you know what? Maybe we're gonna reduce their ask and not agree to some of the lapses
And put
Yeah.
so that we
money
can
in-
finish some of these projects.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But that has to be something I think
That-
BNF, DOE, and then the monies committee work on.
Well, hopefully they get committed and they work through the holidays like the rest of us.
Well, what's difficult is they're gonna need some indication as to proceed with the project, because if we wait all the way till May,
Yeah,
I mean, you could
yeah,
still do it, but then it's gonna be tough.
So
But
can I just interject that I have been meeting with the superintendent and the board chair. And we are discussing some changes in how we proceed, like I don't think the school facilities agency has been active at all, so we might look at moving that within the Department of Education's purview so that they can have that manpower to go and do facilities when they need it, not when SFA thinks they should.
Yeah, but they can't even do what they have now.
But they
and
don't
so
have the
that-
manpower, that's what I'm saying.
So
No,
how
but the
much
whole,
of the-
they have this whole G4, page G4 is committed. I mean, of this, how many are vacant?
Well, OFO has approximately 72 vacancies right now. As we speak.
72, but how much specifically the development branch?
I don't know off the top of my head. It's a large amount. It's a large amount within OFO. I would say probably more like 30.
And so is that part, like what we're trying to figure out is what's the problem?
Yeah.
So is the problem the vacancies, the organization, the
Vacancies is a
communication,
large
the
part of
structure?
Vacancies is a large part of the problem. Their inability for us to recruit, not proactively doing it. I would say.
So knowing your current challenge, how much can you actually handle in CIP? Because even 400 million, I'm like, oh, I don't even think you can do that.
Well, what part of the 400 million is to fund projects that needed more money, that had escalated? What portion of that is for that?
In the request, we've asked for 65 million in project completion funds, of
Only
which BNF is
65
putting,
million.
which BNF is graciously putting into the budget about 49 million. So about a little less, but
And how much do you actually need in actuality?
we wouldn't. It's
You
a-
asked for 100, I thought earlier.
Well, that's
No,
deferred
that's
maintenance.
deferred.
Project completion funds are really for projects that are currently in play of the $1 billion.
Yeah, cost overruns, or you didn't get enough
Yeah.
funding,
That's what
or
I'm saying. How much of the
We-
400 million you're committing to that, to finish the projects out?
Well, that's why we
How many
were
are-
on a stop. We're stuck. We didn't get it last year, so that amount is down to.
No, that's not the question, because the current, you're asking for 400 million now in this new budget. Of the 400 million, how much is to complete the projects, and how much of that is new?
Of 400
yeah,
million.
400. How much is new
Yeah.
projects? How much is project completion of the 400?
Oh, that is the 49 that was approved in this most recent governor's budget that's going
Oh,
through.
so only 49
I
million.
think
So that means 350 is gonna be.
there's other projects that
Oh.
are included. I mean, we did, there were some school safety requests that were inside there.
So 351 is gonna be new projects and 49 is gonna be project completion.
I think that there's a process that we need to true up. Yeah, we need to true up the what's coming now that we're in this process where some projects may go back in into the authorization schedule.
But that's my point. My point is, you folks are not focused on what needs to be completed. When you're putting in new projects, I know there's gonna be some emergency things, safety. But at the end of the day, before you embark on new projects, you gotta take care of the old projects. Right?
So I got one question then. So because areas that you guys deem was sea level rise and stuff, so
Well, flood zone.
a flood zone, should we like just not put nothing in on CIP
Well,
projects?
that's what I was trying to get,
Like-
but Kurt said you should have a discussion with him first.
We
shouldn't even
we
let
need
us
to have
approach
this
someone.
discussion.
Okay, what time you busy later on this afternoon? Because we need a discussion, like
How many schools are in the flood zone?
plenty. I get
We model-
6.
I think, Senator, before we have that discussion, we need to get together, with you and get more information on our end. I think it's important that schools that are in those areas, definitely have needs too. And that, so we need to, really take a look at that and get back to you on more information with that.
So I just like make a note of this real quick. So in Maui County, any future building or build out or expansion needs to have an alternative site. That's a new county ordinance, or now new one's put in year before last. Any expansion off of new or existing buildings, if it doesn't have an alternative site that the building can be moved, it cannot be funded. And this is a case in point that they did with the Molokai College. On Molokai, we had expansion monies for that university. So which means everything from the Kanakakai School, all these guys will be wiped out because they don't have an alternative site. I think you should take that into consideration, which means half of these projects shouldn't even be on the books.
Well, UH has a policy that if a campus has more than 10% backlog, no new building. So I'm
They
not,
don't follow it.
I'm saying, I just said they have a policy. I didn't say they have a policy. So that's something that hopefully you guys are going to be able to get back to us on then on what's the criteria that we should be looking at when we start to add
Yeah.
projects. Because we hate to add money if it's not going to get spent when it could have went to something else, which is equally as important.
And you should tell us ahead of time, if it's in the flood zone, why let us appropriate it before you tell us? And if you're gonna make a statement like that about why you're not doing a project because in the flood zone, now that's gonna apply to every single
Yeah.
school in the flood zone. We're gonna say, well, how come you're doing that? You didn't do it for this school.
So I think, Senator, we need to be sure that, we, get a few of the information. And, I think definitely a communication between all of us and all of you is really important. And I'm approached to ensure that is included, that happens.
Facilities Development Branch is watching.
Yeah, yes.
How many projects go forth that you guys hire consultants on?
For construction management, almost all.
So, okay, so you're hiring all these consultants and you're saying you don't have enough people, but the consultants are the ones that's supposed to do it, right? The project managers. So that's what I can't understand. We outsource so much stuff and yet we still can't get things done.
Well, how much of that though, of the project slabs, but you gave a management contract? So they're still getting paid even though there's no project.
That would be in the planning design aspect, yeah. That's a separate contract normally. That you hire someone for the architecture design, the planning of that. The construction is being awarded.
So they're getting paid even if they're not,
What they're getting paid to provide a design so that we can go with the permit.
but you don't have money for the project, so
But
you're
it's
still
still,
paying them.
We go in for a request for the amount of money that we need in the appropriation. So if it's for planning and design, that is what the allotment request is for.
Okay, you guys, I think you guys got to get a little more information. So what about the projects that the monies were released?
We've worked with BNF to notify them.
If services have been rendered, the state is obligated to make good on that. We would just have to reconcile with the Department of Education. I mean, they have hundreds of projects that are currently in the design phase right now. But again, if services are rendered, our position is that we're obligated to pay, and we'll have to reconcile that with the DOE as we move forward.
And so what about when we start to not agree with some of the lapses? How does this work with DOE saying, okay, we're going to proceed with some of these projects?
Oh, I'm assuming if you say don't proceed with a project, DOE will have to stop.
No,
And then-
we're saying the opposite. We're not going to agree with the forced lapse.
Oh, and then again, what we would do is we would take a look at the authorization schedule, take a look at how much, whether or not we're still within the margins. Do we need to increase? Do projects need to come off the list? And that's when we work with both money chairs to come up with the authorization schedule on debt service going forward. And so that's why, we'll work with you, we'll work with the DOE and every other department that has CIP projects in order to come up with a list. If you guys don't agree to certain projects to early lapse, then we just need to make sure that they're included in the authorization schedule going forward.
But you also.
No, but they already, what if they're already released?
Huh?
You
Then it's gonna have to come off the list, yeah. Then we'll have to make the adjustments in the authorization schedule, for sure.
Out of the $600 million, you remember it came down to 400, right? 70 million. So the amount, the projects that you guys already took off the first,
The extra
What's that?
200, yeah.
that was 270,000, a million, 270.
Those
So
were
that's
the,
already going.
yeah, those are the ones that I believe the DOE identified as out ADA and Title IX stuff. If I'm not mistaken, I think, yeah.
Okay. But not projects that were released.
But not projects that were released.
So there's projects on the list where the money was already released by the.
Well, yeah, but then no encumbrance, no activity, no nothing.
But they've been
but-
working.
Yeah.
With the school already.
Yeah, but no contract, no encumbrance, no nothing going forward, because I think off of the billion that was appropriated in the prior year, 600 million has been requested for release, of which I think they're based upon at least our point in time.
So when the monies were released, how come, why weren't they? Why didn't somebody start working on it?
They do. And that's the process, right? Once.
No, so
money
if
is
they worked
released,
on it, why
we can go into
were there
design.
projects that?
Because we're not to the point of contracting and executing on a construction contract.
Yeah.
We're in that middle phase and that's taking time.
But that's not the
And-
first one. The
No, but
270,000.
The money is for plan, design and construction.
Right, but we can only encumber what,
Yeah.
for that phase. I can't get the construction contract and encumber the entire amount if I don't know what it is. I don't know what the cost is. And that's why the scoping process is.
Why design?
Yeah, but if you did the scoping process, then why is the entire amount still in the lapse?
No, there's a partial lapse. So you're looking at the list.
There's some
that's-
that are partial lapse.
That we've already engaged in a lot of projects and we're in that
It
middle.
looks like the
section.
governor is already releasing, he's sending me 2 projects from the 270 mil. Already releasing today or yesterday, so it look like he's releasing some of the projects already.
And so out of the 900, it was in the material that I provided, right? Of the 990, 1 billion.
But I still don't get it. So if the monies were released, you already started the plan and design. You got approval for the entire amount.
That's
Yes,
what-
you did.
with my
I have the
gift,
governor's memo.
Okay, for a specific project.
Yeah.
Okay. So if the entire amount is encumbered,
I sent it to the superintendent. There are projects that the governor approved the entire, Ige signed one, Green signed one, the entire amount. And if you started with plan and design, why did you throw that on the list?
I don't know if it's our policy or BNS policy, but we can only go in for the amount that I'm going in for next. And the contract is a.
No, but
design
what I'm
contract.
saying is you guys already started on the project. Why would you throw that on the lapse list? If you already went through, you
Well,
got
that-
the monies
that started
released,
there.
you started with plan and design. And then all of a sudden you say, oh, we're not going to finish it. So we'll turn it in.
Go to bid.
It-
Without
I-
the-
there's-
No, but there are other projects in there that had the exact same situation, but they're not on the
That's
list.
the challenge that we have, right? We're in that middle stage where we're not sure.
But
whether
that,
permitting-
but that's not equally applied across the board. So going back to Senator Kim's projects, or what she had said earlier, there are some projects that the monies were released, you did plan and design, but they're not on the forced snaps list.
Because we're close to moving forward. If there's a permit, we can go, right? A lot of the pending ones it's in permitting process, but it's when are they gonna issue that
Okay,
permit?
okay, so that's fine. So you know what we'll do? We will send a memo asking for copies of all of those documents so that we can go now project by project to see what's permitted, what's not, what you have the contract, so we can kind of get a better assessment.
Yes.
And if there's no consistency, then what?
Well, that's the whole objective. We're gonna assess.
No?
Senator,
So if there's no consistency, then now what's going to be excused then?
There's no excuse. It has to be
yeah,
consistent.
Senator, and we definitely have there is an urgency to look at our processes that we're currently using and reevaluate that because we definitely need to do a better job in identifying those projects and the rationale for why they were on the list. But that's part of our overall attempt and commitment to improving what we're currently doing.
Okay, well, we're gonna have to figure this out because I don't think you're gonna get the whole 400 million when we still have to reconcile with the membership as to which projects they don't want lapsed.
And I don't want to sound like a broken record, but you need to improve the processes. You need to improve this. You need to improve. It's like everything. At what point did you determine that this wasn't working until such time this has happened? You know what I'm saying? It's like you wait until the problems arise before being proactive to know that this is not going to work.
Yeah, so maybe if members are looking at other school districts around the nation and they know of a facilities branch that probably has better outcomes, we should take a look at that and introduce a bill so that we can start the discussion on reorganizing OFO. Because going back to your point, if we're going to wait for them to do that,
Yeah.
we might as well start the conversation and have them react if that's the case. Any other questions? If not, happy holidays.
Thank you.